Here's a couple of different examples right here. This right here is called a bar graph. It is categorical. The question what is your preferred communication method? Do you like cell phone, Facebook, in person, or text? So they randomly asked individuals what their favorite way to do this was. And they took 10 randomly selected people and said, what's your preferred communication method? Well, when we know that's categorical, because the question that we're being asked is, how do you prefer to communicate? You cannot answer it with 105. You say, oh, cell phone's my favorite way. Oh, I like text. Okay, so this is a example of categorical variable. And in a categorical variable, we'll either use a bar graph or a pie chart, usually a bar graph, to represent the distribution. The distribution is saying, what variables can it take? Oh, it can take cell phone, it can take Facebook, it can take in-person, and it can take text message. How often does it take it? Oh, 2 people said cell phone, 1 person said Facebook, 3 people said in-person, and 4 people said text messaging. So this bar graph is showing us what the variables are. It's showing us whether they're categorical or quantitative, and it's showing us how often each variable shows up in the distribution. Okay? If you look at example B over here that I'm going to highlight with red, I hope here, or I'm going to circle in red. Now they said, how many languages do you speak? Is that categorical or quantitative? Answer the question. How many languages do you speak? 3, 4. Oh, I answered with a number, therefore it is quantitative. Quantitative is answered with a numerical value. Once again, we need to display that. And we'll use different types of graphs to display quantitative data. This example is a dot plot. And all we're simply doing is stacking up the dots on top of one another for how many took that variable. So the number of language spoken, 1. Oh, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can't count, can I? 6 people said they speak 1 language. 3 people said they speak 2 languages. And 1 person said they speak 4 languages. So here they asked the same 10 people, how many languages do you speak? Oh, I answered that with a number. It's quantitative. And then how do I display that quantitative data? One way that we could possibly display that data is through a dot plot. And that's what you see here in example B. Okay. Now, let's take a look at another way to arrange the data. So we looked at graphically how we would show the data. Well, how would we start to describe what we see numerically? Okay, so one way is a frequency table. And all we're doing in a frequency table is showing how often each variable occurred. So here's the same example from the previous page. We asked 10 people, what's your preferred method of communication? And these are tally marks over here on the far left. 1, 2 people said cell phone. I asked the next person, they said, oh, in person. The next person, oh, they said Facebook. And the next person said, oh, I like text messaging. And then we just recorded all of these. So you can see here in the frequency table, 2 chose cell phone, 2 chose cell phone, 1 chose Facebook, 3 chose in person, and 4 chose text messaging. All right, so frequency table simply shows us the number of individuals that take each value. What do they mean here by relative frequency? Anytime we see this word relative, we need to automatically think, oh, it's percentages, it's percents. Okay? All relative frequency is taking the frequencies and converting them to percentages. So 2 out of 10 said cell phone. Oh, that's 20%. 1 out of 10 said Facebook. Oh, that's 10%. 3 out of 10 said in person. That's 30%. 4 out of 10 said they prefer text messaging. That's 40%. So frequency is a simple count of how many times it came up. Relative frequency tells us the percentage of the time that it came up. So we need to make that distinction between the two. Relative means percent. Relative means percent. Okay. Now, let's look at a couple of ways to show categorical data. Remember categorical? You answer the question with a word, not a number. A bar graph shows each category as a bar. The heights of the bars show the frequency, or in some cases, relative frequency. Now, this example here, this is relative frequency. I know that because it says percent. So there wasn't 20 people who chose cell phone. 20% of all the people chose cell phone. And the pie chart is another way to, the pie chart's just another way for us to show this data. It's a relative, 40%, 20%, 10%, 30%. Total must always be 100% in a pie chart. How do we make a bar graph? Draw and label the axes. So what they mean by draw the axes and label. What are the categories? Cell phone, Facebook, in-person text messaging. Okay. And what are we going to do? Relative, percent. Oh, 0%, 10%, 20. So we need to scale and make sure that these are equal distance each time. And then we simply draw the bars above the category names. So all of this here is representing the same data set. Okay? Here's the relative frequency table. Here is a relative bar graph, and here is a pie chart. Okay. Now, is this data we're going to look at here, is this categorical or is it quantitative? Are you a member of the environmental club? No. Oh, I answered with a word, categorical. Do you own a snowmobile, or do you rent one, or have you never used one? I rent one. I answered with a word, so we're looking at categorical data again. This table over here is what we're going to refer to as a two-way table. A two-way table counts and summarizes the data on the relationship between two categorical variables. So the two variables we're looking at is snowmobile use and environmental club. So this two-way table is going to show us this. Okay. Now, what are we going to do with this two-way table? We can answer all kinds of questions. Okay. This marginal word here, marginal, means the margins. So marginal would be everything in the totals. So there's 1,221 who are not member of the environmental club. 305 people surveyed were members of the environmental club. 657 have never used a snowmobile. 574 have rented one, and 295 own one. Notice that these two variables for the row, this 1221 and 305, they add up to make 1526. And if you add these three row variables, 657, 574, and 295, they add up to make 1526. So we'll have a column variable, which goes up and down. So the column variable would be the environmental club, and the row variable would be the snowmobile use. Now, marginal is talking about these totals out here. A marginal relative frequency gives the percent or proportion of individuals that have a specific value for one categorical variable. Marginal, you're going to be using the totals. So they might say a marginal relative frequency of snowmobile owners. We would say, oh, snowmobile owners, what is the marginal relative frequency of snowmobile owners? Oh, that is 295 out of 1526. Okay. This is marginal. We're using the totals to answer the question. We're looking at one categorical variable at a time. Okay. What percent of our example are members of the environmental club? Oh, the environmental club members. Are you a member of the environmental club? Yes. 305 out of how many? 1526. So marginal relative frequencies looking at one variable at a time. And then we could convert these to percentages. We could convert these to decimals or proportions as well. Okay. Because remember this word relative says percents. So I should be consistent and convert these to a percent because I see the word relative. So 295 divided by 1526 tells me, oh, around 19.3%. So we'll say approximately 19% of people own snowmobiles. 305 divided by 1526 tells me, oh, approximately 20% of the people are members of the environmental club. So relative tells us percent. It doesn't tell us a count as to how many there are. It tells us what percent of the total are in that category. Joint relative frequency gives the percent or proportion of individuals that have a specific value for one categorical variable and a specific value for the other. So joint relative frequency changes things up now. So joint relative, remember this word relative says, oh, I got to do a percent. Joint means we're looking at two things. We're joining the two together. So for example, what is the joint relative frequency of environmental club members who have never used a snowmobile? Environmental club members, oh, you have to be a member of the club, yes, and you've never used a snowmobile. So we go, yes, so here, and never used here. Joint, the two that got circled both times, this 212. So if I want the joint relative frequency of environmental club members and never used a snowmobile. So the joint relative frequency for that would be 212 over 1526. Remember that relative means percent. So I need to convert that 212 to 212 over 1526 into a percent. So 212 divided by 1526, oh, about 13.9%. So the joint relative frequency of environmental club members who have never used a snowmobile before is 13.9% approximately. And this question could be asked any way, shape, or form. It could be you're not a member of the environmental club, but you own a snowmobile. You rented a snowmobile and you are a member of the environmental club. So there's lots of different ways this joint relative frequency question can be answered. And I think it's pretty straightforward. And I'm guessing that you're not going to have many issues with this.